I was gassed. I lost my sense of smell. I heard my father, Wilhelm Edward Kantorowicz, speak of his war experiences 3 times in his life. The first time was when my mother, forgetting, passed him a bottle of milk to sniff to see if it was sour. His explanation about not being able to smell was matter of fact, every day. Old enough to be my grandfather, my father participated in World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars. I say participated because it's hard for me to imagine my social worker father fighting anyone. I have been subject to anxiety and depression most of my life. I've been through cognitive behavioral therapy, Gestalt therapy, somatic emotional therapy, craniosacral manipulation. I have danced on the beach with Sufi dancers, spent a month in silence with a Benedictine monk, gone mad with Bhagwan Rajneesh Sannyasin, and downward dog for 6 weeks with a yogi. One day it occurred to me that maybe I was subject to the psychological war wounds of my father, like a congenital bone disease. Maybe that was a good story that explained the nameless fears that kept me up at night and the sagging doldrums of despair which were at odds with my positive life situation. Was I still cowering from artillery shells fired 100 years ago? I had to find out. World War number one. That was my Oma, my grandmother. That's how she lilted it. She came from the old country. The old country, that's a word she used a lot. And I learned at an early age that the old country was a lot better than the 1950s Los Angeles, where she lived in a Spanish-style apartment with tiled roofs about half a mile from the block on Fairfax with the kosher butchers. Classical music always played on the radio. She read the Aufbau, Reconstruction, for German Jews mailed for every week from New York. I once heard her use the word Yiddishkeit to refer to those Polish Jews. Uh-huh. German Jews were more German than Polish. German Jews were more German than Jewish. The old country, that's the way it was then, but before 1899, when we heard that Johann Strauss had died, we didn't have a funeral in our little town. We had a ball. It was an outdoor ball. A band played in the Schillerplatz. The trumpets and flutes shone in the sunlight. Oh, and we danced and danced and danced and danced. Oh, but your grandfather was never a very good dancer. At that time, young ladies could only study French, English, Italian, and history of art, but only in the living rooms of the very best families. We didn't go to synagogue. I thought it was better to take the boys for a walk in the country. We would sit down by the canal, and I would ask them to tell me how many bird songs they could hear. Then after our lunch, I told them to be ever so quiet so we could see the difference between the waves made by the carp and the waves made by the eel. There are different kinds of waves, nicht wahr? Carl Jung said that the greatest danger to the child is the unlived life of the parent. Your father saw unspeakable horrors in his early age. At a certain date, he just stopped living. Oh, come on. He was just a normal guy with 2 kids, wife, and a dog in the 1950s. He was 49 years old when you were born. What does that tell you? Oh, he was optimistic. they used to call it shell shock. Now we know it as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. He had it bad. Look, all right, maybe he compensated, but his insurance business was a front for his own personal social welfare agencies. African Americans, Chicanos, Eastern European immigrants, anybody who needed a form to fill out or couldn't read, they came to Bill Kent. Well, whoop-de-doo. He was compassionate. Did he bring it home with him? Well, isn't that the natural response to human suffering? Oh, then there were those pills he took to calm down the anxiety. Your mother really gave him a hard time for that. Miltone. Oh, he didn't take that many of them. You are in such denial. I am not. When did I first meet war? Anyone of my generation would have the same answer. 1955. Elementary school drop drills. Mrs. Upham, our half Cherokee first grade teacher with a nose that was just like the Indian on the Buffalo Head nickel, was supposed to give us the command of drop when she saw the first flash of a nuclear device. We were then supposed to get, as fast as we can, get down under our desks with our heads over our heads, and wait. Of course, when the shock wave hit our school, we'd be protected from our little desks so that whoever was still alive could pull us from the rubble. And then there were these hall drills at a special bell signal. We'd go out into the halls and take that same position and wait and wait. Oh, what a relief. Back in the classroom, I made a drawing of some little lollipop trees, all in gray. What kind of trees are those, Roger? Mrs. Upham asked. Oh, those aren't trees. Those are the clouds made by the bombs. Oh, you have too much imagination, Roger. Imagine that. Wilhelm Edward Kantorowicz was 15 when he first met war. He was born in Posen in 1901, in what was then the German state of East Prussia. The German Federation as we know it today was barely 30 years old. In Posen at that time, the administration was Prussian, the street signs in German, but most of the people Polish. And then between them were those Jews, the German Jews and the Polish Jews. At that time, German boys studied French, penmanship, history, and algebra. If they passed their exams well, they made it to gymnasium, high school. So imagine 1915, the scrubbed and tidy principal's office of the Karl Friedrich Gymnasium. Herr Baumann still wears the frock coat of a previous era. Ach, Kantorowicz, there you are. The fatherland has a mission for you. Sergeant Muller needs help translating for the French prisoners of war who are working on our roads, and you have the best marks in French. You will report to him every morning at 7:15. That is all. Oh, Kantorowicz, I do expect you to keep up with your schoolwork. So I imagine Wilhelm, legs dangling off the back of a horse cart. Poor Sergeant Muller, barely able to fit into the ancient uniform of the Home Guard, hardly able to manage the horse cart. They come upon a platoon of bedraggled men lounging on shovels. Hey, Jackie, regarde, le nouveau gardien! The new guard. Oh, Alphonse, ils sont toujours plus petits! Alphonse, they're getting smaller and smaller. Bon, alors, je m'appelle Wilhelm. My name is Wilhelm. Just like the Kaiser. I'm here to help you translate what Sergeant Muller is telling you. Now, apparently you don't understand about getting those rocks from the quarry over here to the road. these rocks are very heavy. Of course they are. These rocks are German rocks. And German rocks are heavier than French rocks. Alphonse, this guy's quicker than you are. The wagon that was supposed to take my father back home was late that evening. He joined them in their meager rations, and they passed around a rusty tin can that was filled with water from an old gasoline tank. They toasted to liberté, fraternité, and equalité, and compared vintages from the 1901 Chateau Lafite Rothschild to the 1905. My father really got on with these guys. For the first time in his life, he had an experience to connect to the words joie de vivre. But eventually, several months of this doing double duty, road crew by day and keeping up with his studies at night, really got to him. Oma was really concerned. Hey, Count Robert, you like eating them frog legs? Hey, I heard his mama tried to get him out of war work. Hey, those froggies will jump away from our troops every day, Kantarovich. You hang out with them cowards. Alphonse soon died of dysentery. My father helped make the special arrangements to get a letter home to his family. So before he went to the war came to him. In 1958, a great television event took place. A fictional account of nuclear warfare right on our shores, brought to you by Chevrolet. See the USA in your Chevrolet. You know, before it gets blown up. A rural family in Iowa watched Des Moines getting nuked in the distance. Their son, a young boy about my age, was blinded by the flash. They ran to the supermarket, but the cupboards were bare, having been ransacked by a panicked crowd. They tried to get news on a transistor radio. Remember transistor radios? Uh-huh. But none of the channels were broadcasting. This is the Cold War, kiddies. It can turn hot at any moment. Keep your eyes peeled for that nuclear flash. But keep your eyes closed, don't even blink. You don't want to get blinded like that kid. Why doesn't your family have a bomb shelter? In 1962, a few years later, Kennedy and Khrushchev faced off over the Cuban Missile Crisis. At the tender age of 13, I tried to imagine if we had another one of those hallway drills, and this time it was the real thing. I tried to persuade Chrissy Elkins to step into the broom closet with me so we could make love once and for all. Shortly after that, when we were just starting Mr. Akeda's fifth period science class, Jerry Crawford overheard a bunch of us talking. I'll tell you what I saw. This sailor pulled up in a Jeep and came out and ran into the principal's office. Ellen Maddow was there. She told me the whole thing. The principal was arguing with the sailor. The sailor was saying the president wanted us to go home to our parents so we could be incinerated with them and not with our teachers at school. It was a few hours later before I realized Jerry was pulling our leg. What a clown. A few years later, he was the only Vietnam casualty I actually knew by name. 1966, off to college back east, free from parental authority. Free to smoke dope, a lot of dope, all I could want. Oh, but alas, the bliss and relaxation of stoner nirvana never was available to me. And then one day I got stopped and searched in New York City with a kilo of marijuana in a paper bag in the back seat of my car that went undetected. That should have cured me. Well, to ground myself, I got into hatha yoga. This was long before the Vedic incorporation of Yoga International into Shopping Mall America. There he is, Swami Gitananda, with whom I spent that retreat. He was Indian, but he had spent 10 years in America. He was also a doctor. He was a psychiatrist for the CIA. No joke. At 65 years old, he could put both of his feet behind his neck and roll around on the ground, all 250 pounds of him, like a daruma. If you don't know what daruma is, that Japanese child's doll with a round bottom. You push it over, and it comes back. You push it over, and it comes back. Daruma comes from the Hindu word dharma, meaning the truth or the way. It was also the name of the Japanese monk who brought Zen Buddhism to Japan. But eventually, for me, though I realize that yoga is wonderful, look at this yoga studio, yoga only referenced for me an external truth. Oh, it didn't turn me into a daruma, always bouncing back. Swami went back to bliss in India, and I had to live in America. Sometime after his more benign consorting with the enemy, Wilhelm Kantorowicz became Private Kantorowicz. I imagine it shortly after his 16th birthday, when the terrible winter of 1917-18 froze over the continent. Lost is the conscription letter, which probably arrived when he was at school. I imagine Oma opening it, no privacy for a young man, and immediately dispatching his servants to Opa, my grandfather's office, to come immediately. He waited until lunchtime. But why are we in this war? Well, the Serbians defied the Austrians, and then the Russians came to the aid of the Serbians, and the Germans came to the aid of Austrians, and then the French came to the aid of the Russians, and the British. But what does this have to do with us and our Wilhelm? I wondered, did they have to say oaths of allegiance to the Kaiser? Did they have live bullets to target practice with? Did they shiver in that cold outdoor tents waiting to be shipped to the front, where they taught rousing songs to raise morale? I wish I were there to tell him, don't go. Please don't. No, hell no, don't go, damn it. At what age does a boy become a man? The Talmud, the Jewish book of laws, says 13. The United States Selective Service says 18. But you have to register at 16, a kind of little pre-man ritual. So I've come for the forms, but I'm not going to the army. Okay, kid, look, we're just the postal service here. We keep the forms. But I'm not going to go and I'm not going to kill anyone. Oh, okay, you must want the conscientious objector form. No, yes, that's the one where you don't have to go. Well, son, I'm just the post office here. Take the form, fill it out, and by the way, write your congressman. My mother was not Jewish. Therefore, by that same Talmudic law, I am not Jewish. I was raised every Sunday in the Hollywood Church of Religious Science, a kind of New Age, positive thinking first cousin of Christian Science. The minister of that church began his religious life as a Southern Baptist. He laced his sermons with tales of enlistment in the Army Air Corps in 1915. I mention the enlistment part because I don't ever remember hearing anything about his soaring up, and away over enemy lines. I I mount the steps toward Dr. Bitzer's office. I knock and enter. He sits behind his desk and doesn't get up. I want you to approve my conscientious objector form. Conscientious objector? Son, don't you want to defend your country? Well, I thought Jesus said, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Oh, son, you are so naive. The word doesn't work that way. The communists are out for world domination. Well, we argued. He reluctantly signed the form. My local draft board rejected it. A couple years later, in 1969, the Selective Service began the draft lottery. It was another televised event. They had this big plastic ball with 366 other little balls in it, one for each day of the year. I sat around in the living room with a bunch of my buddies drinking beer and whatever else. They started with the high numbers. We had a sheet on the wall with everybody's birth date on it. April 12th, 316, Josh Freeman, that's a high number, great. The night went on. August 10th, Paul Mayfield, 216, great. Could be better though. We waited. My number wasn't called. Finally, toward 11 o'clock, June 30th, number 14. Oh, what was I going to do? Was I going to go to Canada? Was I going to go to jail? Would I change my name and go underground? Would I be a refugee in a foreign land? Between my minister's cold shoulder and my low draft number, I rejected the idea of a childhood notion of a personal God and set sail for the chilly seas of adulthood. I was gassed. I lost my sense of smell. I heard my father, Wilhelm Edward Kantorowicz, speak of his war experiences 3 times in his life. The second time was when my sister berated him for leaving the gas on in the kitchen. After she left, he told me again, in a very matter-of-fact way, about his not being able to smell. In my junior year of college, when I came home, my mother pleaded to me, "He wants to talk to you." Well, why can't he ask me to talk to him himself? He's not that way. Talk to him. All right, I'll be there in the den at 7 o'clock. So, this is the conversation we never had. So, if Wallace runs as an independent, Nixon will take away the Southern Democrats, and Nixon will win this 68 election. Dad, I don't want to talk about politics. I just want to figure out how I'm going to get out of the draft. Well, you are going to graduate school, aren't you? Graduate school in English is not going to get me out of the draft. Yeah, I couldn't get out of my war. Oh, what happened to you in your war? I don't even know if you were on the Eastern Front or the Western Front. Oh, what do you want to know? Oh, something, anything. Well, the political situation was very different at that time between the governments. And Dad, I don't care about politics. Help me to figure out what to do about the draft. Well, there are some decisions every man must make for himself. To calm myself down, I was initiated into transcendental meditation. For those of you who don't know, TM was popularized because the Beatles did it, but they had a falling out with the guru. So one bright May morning, I was told to bring a flower, and I reported to a nondescript building with 12 folding chairs and 12 other people in them. And we listened to a very New England looking man with a clean-cut haircut, no facial hair, and a perfect tie. He looked like a fashion model. We will go into the next room. You will give me your flower. I will offer your flower to the guru, and then I will give you your mantra. You are not to share your mantra with anyone else. I figured if you hung out with the guru long enough, you started to pick up his inflections. If I did this kind of meditation, would I start talking like that? Hey, would I look like that guy? The first time I did TM was very relaxing. And the second time, and the third time, and the 752nd time, I did TM exactingly for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. I found park benches, church pews, toilet stalls, even the back room of a bar with a beer as a prop. TM works. It calms you down. It lowers your heart rate and your blood pressure. They even taught TM to soldiers in the early 70s. You could believe in anything or not believe in anything at all and still do this kind of meditation. Herbert Benson at the Harvard Medical School did some research and discovered what they call the relaxation response. You could use any word. You could use Mickey Mouse as long as you did it twice a day for 20 minutes. It had the same physiological effects and chilled you out. Of course, I realized that growing up in the Cold War, I didn't think I could plan ahead for 2 weeks at a time. Every day was tentative. I needed something to calm me down, and I'd take this meditation any day so I wouldn't be cowering after that nuclear sneak attack. In 1921, Wilhelm took a boat for New York, first class, avoiding the immigration humiliation of Ellis Island. I think he must have started using the half-wild name of Kent at that time. He strode down the gangplank right into the Jazz Age. Imagine being in your 20s in New York City in the roaring 20s. I can't even imagine my father doing the Charleston. Of course, I wonder if my daughter can imagine me doing the Frug or the Funky Chicken. As he told it, a few years later, 2 men knocked on his apartment door in the West Village and flashed their FBI cards. Hey, Mr. Kent. Hey, wait a minute, Gil. This guy's not a Kent. He's a Kent, whatever the hell your name is. We happen to know that you are not here on legal pretenses. We can arrest you right now. Go ahead, Joe. Arrest him. Gil, you know what hassle that is to fill out all those deportation papers? All right, buddy. We'll make you a deal, whatever the hell your name is. I happen to know that the Cunard Line Aquitania is leaving tomorrow morning at 9:15 for Southampton from Pier 93. She's a beautiful ship. We could take you down there right now. You could buy a ticket. We'd even see you to your stateroom. Grab your coat. So life can change quickly. I see him on the battlefield. There's a lot of confusion. Men are running everywhere. There's an artillery barrage. There's some kind of gas. In order to get to the bottom of my father's story, I went to see Marvin, a psychic. He was a retired special education teacher from Arkansas. He worked out of his suburban living room, which was full of artwork that his special kids had given him over the years. Yeah, he's running into some gas. It's poison gas. Scheiße, he actually used a German word. It's from the guys in the next trench. They sent the gas in the wrong direction. Those Dummkopf, there I was, using that German word again. This had to be authentic. He's running. He can't breathe. Oh, Lord. He stumbles on a man on the ground. The man is dead. The man has a gas mask. He pulls it off him. He tries to get it on. No one ever to train him how to put on a gas mask. Finally, he gets it on. But he can't breathe. It's clogged. He passes out. Roger, that's about all I can tell you right now. Well, shall I come back another time? Well, do you think there's more of the story? I don't know. I sure know this, that he was betrayed by his own side. I quit TM. I felt I was hypnotizing myself. I realized I wanted to meet life head on without drugs or mantras as drugs. I got into Buddhist meditation. The instruction was very simple. Watch your breathing, but watch your thoughts. Watch as that thought comes up deep from within you, reaches the surface, and when it arrives, just let it go. The same with those sensations and ugly emotions. Watch them arise and come to the surface and let them go. The only trouble was I had a hard time letting go of those very difficult emotions, with the usual suspect. Money, relationships, sex, love, prestige. They just wanted to keep coming up and keep coming up. The Tao Te Ching says the way to do is to be. But how do you continue to do when you're not sitting there trying to be a Buddha? Oma was taking care of wounded soldiers back in Posen. Here is her German Rote Kreuz, Red Cross medal for meritorious service to the fatherland. What could she tell little brother Peter, 12, still playing with guns and hoping he too could grow up and get conscripted? She asks a soldier whose wounds she is dressing, "Were you in the unit from Central Posen? Where were you when you were wounded? Maybe you know my son Wilhelm. If he were wounded, they would send a letter, wouldn't they? If he were killed, they would send somebody to my house, wouldn't they? He's 1'7", 1'8". I told him to be careful." In the last week of 1918, about a month after the famous November 11th armistice that silenced the guns on the Western Front, the Poles made a bid with an armed uprising to take a Polish state for which they had long yearned. Well, I came back from war and I got the hat shot right off my head by Polish revolutionaries in the town square. So if the gas didn't mess up my dad's gonads and a sniper aiming just a little 2 fingers too high, otherwise I wouldn't have burst into the world 30 years later. The family had to decide whether they were going to be German or Polish. And given the Poles' attitude towards Jews and, quite frankly, their attitude toward the Poles, there wasn't much of a choice. They sold their property for pennies, packed up their belongings, and moved to Berlin. After all, they were more German than Jewish. In 1970, I packed up my belongings and left the college town of Ithaca, New York, to seek my fortune in the wide, wide world. My father was too ill to come to my Cornell graduation, and quite frankly, I didn't see the need to be there myself. My reward for graduating college was the loss of my student deferment from the military. So a month later, there I was in Boston, breading cod and frying shrimp in a fish restaurant, when this selective service caught up with me. I got an invitation to report to my Army physical exam. What was I going to do? Was this going to be my chance to lead my troops over the top? So one balmy summer morning, with the salt sea in my nostrils, I strode into the Boston Navy Yard with a stack of leaflets rubber banded to my legs and a box of pins stuffed in my crotch. Listen up, gentlemen. Today is the first day of the process of your serving your country. Sergeant, yes, son. Is killing Vietnamese children serving my country? Shut up, son. I'm warning you. Now, Corporal Morales is passing out some forms and he's got some pencils. Sir? Yes, son. My paper's upside down. Son, come up here. Sergeant? Are we in the Army yet? No. Well, can you order us around? The sergeant was so pissed, he left the room, probably for reinforcements. Hey, guys, listen up. I've got these flyers here that explain all your options to the military. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to go to Canada. But you gotta know your options. And also, I've got these pins here. Just take them, one to a customer. Prick your finger and put as much blood as you can in your urine. You will not look like a healthy man. The sergeant came back in the room by himself, calmed down. And he ordered us to line up against the wall and file into the gauntlet that was the Army physical exam. I told the eye doctor I couldn't read. Well, do the best you can, he said. H-E-L-L space N-O. Next, the other eye. W-E space W-O-N apostrophe T. Next! Well, I fell over on the balance test and I made a bloody mess of my urine specimen. Eventually, I reached the final doctor. So pull down your drawers, son, and I've got to give you a hernia exam. Don't touch my balls! Well, son, if you want to be in the Army, you have to have a hernia exam. I don't want to be in the Army. I don't want to kill people. I love humanity too much. Oh, you're a queer, are you? Well, I'll tell you, I'll fuck anything on two legs. I couldn't make this up. And I forgot to ask him about chimpanzees. We stared each other down. I pulled a letter from my back pocket from my pediatrician who said that I had asthma. I tried to wheeze a little. He looked at it, grunted, and marked 4F on my form and told me to get the hell out of there. 4F meant that I was exempt from military service. I was free to live in America. I didn't have to go to Canada. I didn't have to go to jail. But I wanted to get out, but not this way. It felt, frankly, cowardly. What would I tell my son? Later that night, I went out and danced to the African drumming, shirtless in Inman Square, with a stack of six-packs all the way up to my shoulder, sharing them with anybody. Yes, I live in America. The spiritual fairy tale books tell of fabled Zen masters who whack you over the head if you fall asleep in meditation. Okay, maybe you have to be awake to wake up. But it occurred to me that this kind of vigilance was like a tough snake. You could be awake to the sky, you could be awake to the trees, you could be awake to the creek, but the trees weren't smiling, the brook wasn't laughing. Eventually, it occurred to me that bringing in the heart had to be part of the program. Encountering compassion and forgiveness for all sentient beings. But then I realized that had to include dictators, rapists, eco-criminals. I realized I had to start small. I mean, forgiving my friends was hard enough. But forgiving myself, forget it. And then I read that the philosopher Gurdjieff said, well, just start with animals. So I thought, at least I could try loving my dog. There he is. 15 years of total unconditional love. His love for me. Wilhelm returned to Berlin at the height of the Weimar incompetence and hyperinflation. They say you had to get a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. I think he didn't like being back in his native land because he soon, according to the papers that I could find, decamped to England, where I think the democracy was more to his liking, somewhat like America. At this time, and I don't know how, he got into the insurance business. There he is, the self-confessed stage door Johnny, all dressed up to go to work for Lloyd's of London on Fleet Street. In my parents' house, at the bottom of a drawer of an old cabinet, I found a folder full of letters. There was one from a Mr. Winkins. I hired Mr. Kent in 1934 to handle a certain number of matters on the continent, for which I was most appreciative. It seems that the Nazis were trying to get their hands on as much cash as they could, and they didn't care how they got it. Lloyd's had recently insured all the large animals at the Munich Zoo. My firm was contracted to try to determine how much it would cost to replace all the animals. And then one of the polar bears died. I sent the able Mr. Kent to investigate. What happened next is clouded by that day in 1974, September 20th, when I opened my father's safety deposit box shortly after he died. There were 2 German passports. One issued in Berlin in 1933 with a big J on it. The other issued by the London consular office 6 months later without a J on it. He must have told him he got his passport stolen. So with that passport tucked into his pocket, I see him talking to the big-eyed warden of the large animals at the Munich Zoo, who tearfully recounted to him how one day the brown shirts, the Nazi professional thugs, took over the zoo and had a big party and drank a lot of beer and threw the beer bottles into the polar bear's enclosure. The shattered glass got in the polar bear's meat. And, well, the brown shirts watched my father leave the warden's office and asked him what he was doing. He told them it was none of their business and started to walk quickly toward the train station. A chase ensued. He saw the train coming in the distance and ran as fast as he could, but they caught him just as the train arrived and started to beat the shit out of him. He barely survived and made it onto the last car, hanging on. 3 months later, back in London, he sought out a relative who signed over $50,000 worth of stock certificates to him on paper. Putting on his best suit with his bowler hat and umbrella, he strode into the United States Embassy, a very rich man, asking for an immigrant visa. Of course, if you had money, it was no problem. 3 weeks later, he wired the money back to the relative in New York, hocked his clothes, and he too was free to live in America. War apparently today seems inevitable. Chancellor Hitler has just signed a non-aggression treaty with Stalin. Poland is caught in the middle. That was August 23rd, 1939, the day my parents got married. Their honeymoon was from Los Angeles to San Francisco, up Highway 1. Past Santa Barbara, they lost radio reception. William, whom my Colorado-born mother called Bill, was concerned about his mother. She was still in Berlin. He goes out the next morning after their first honeymoon night to a Chinese grocery and picks up a newspaper. They read it, the San Francisco Chronicle, together. They've closed the Western Front. She won't be able to get a train to Paris. I'm praying for her. I know she is protected. I never knew my father to pray, but my mother's faith was constant and deep. The U.S. State Department was unabashedly anti-Semitic in those days. They knew Jews were being persecuted, but after all, the 1940 election was just around the corner, and Roosevelt didn't want to rock the boat. There must have been hard times in the White House bedroom that summer, because eventually Eleanor Roosevelt pressured the State Department to release 10,000 visas to German Jews. I've got the copies of the letters that my father pecked out with 2 fingers on his old Smith Corona. He wasn't sure if the letters got through to either Berlin or Washington. We have Elisa Licht-Kantorovic's diary. It tells of her boarding the train that morning when my father and mother slept their first honeymoon night in San Luis Obispo. But the train didn't head west, it headed east. I see her in the compartment there with Stanislaw Wojcicka, a paunchy Polish businessman with mustache, smoking a pipe. He's reading a paper. He's just come back from saying goodbye to his German business partners in Berlin and pulling the remaining partnerships out of a bank that was reluctant to let him do so. He watches with wonderment at the woman across from him, who, oh, so carefully, snips with seamstress scissors the yellow Star of David patch off her garment. She doesn't throw it out the window. She carefully, oh so carefully, places it in the ashtray where he has just emptied his pipe. The patch doesn't catch fire, but smolders. The smoke spirals up to the ceiling. And then Wojcicka realizes, I've seen this woman. I bought a bag of cookies from her yesterday in the railway station. I didn't know we weren't supposed to. She looks so gaunt. Should I give her a few zloty to buy bratwurst on the station when I get off? Oh, but she's so proud. Would she accept help from me? Oh, she's gone out. I'll leave a few bills underneath the ashtray. Oma's diary tells of a painfully slow trip, shunting on and off sidetracks, stopping and starting in stations, a journey that normally would have taken 2 days, taking 6. On August 31st, there's a very simple one-line entry. Twilight, the train passes into Russia. At 4 a.m. the next morning, the Wehrmacht blitzkriegs into Poland. So, that's it. I never went to war. Well, that's not quite true. I went to war one day for peace. My senior year of college, I went to a demonstration in Syracuse, New York. I thought it was, just going to be another one of those protests, but the organizers had other ideas. We were going to do a sit-down in front of this induction center that had a bus with newly minted army recruits off to their first tour of duty. Was I going to take a stand? Was I going to sit down? What if the cops started swinging billy clubs? What if it got ugly? I decided this was my moment. Whatever was going to happen, I walked forward and sat down. I still remember that rough asphalt on my butt. It was warm. It was soft. The cops were not violent. They were politely asking each of us if we wanted to move, and when they didn't, asked us to stand up and walk with them into a bus, just like the ones that the recruits were in. I thought I maybe would go limp, but I decided, I'd made my statement, I might as well pay for it. Those 2 hours in the jail cell were remarkably peaceful. It was a personal piece for a personal act. Oh, hi, Daddy. Oh, not much. How about you? I went to a demonstration today in Syracuse. I got arrested. Well, there were 145 of us. I got out on bail. I thought maybe you'd be proud of me. I can't worry if it's going to be on my record for the rest of my life. I can't worry about the rest of my life. When you're 21, you think you're going to live forever. All you're interested in what's happening now. Maybe that's what life is really about anyway. A few years ago, I took a business trip to Brazil. I knew there was a relative down there somewhere, so I called around on the aging cousin network and finally got an address in Puerto Alegre, 1,000 miles south of Sao Paulo, almost to Uruguay. I finished my business early in Sao Paulo and went to the airport and slapped down my credit card and took a flight to Porto Alegre. Waltraud Kant, as she was called, at 94, was a very sweet woman. She met me as if distant relatives drop in any day. She sat there swinging on a outdoor sofa on a porch, reading a newspaper. Why can't my government do anything right? They're building these football stadiums for this World Cup, and there's so much corruption. What is it with this family? So much politics. We had one of those conversations of trying to figure out exactly how we were related. It seems that she had married a second cousin who was a violist in a string quartet, and they had gone on a tour to South America in 1933 and not come back. I bided my time, waiting to ask her questions about my father in Berlin at the time she would have known him. Always a ladies' man. Every week a new one. He rode around town on a motorcycle in shirt sleeves in the middle of winter. I was told he went to some very wild parties. I wasn't invited. Did he tell you anything about the war, the one he was in? Your father was in the war? Oh, I don't believe it. My brother Felix never recovered. I could always tell a war veteran. But your father? Oh, no. Was so lebensfreudig. Was so lebensfreudig. He was so lebensfreudig. Lebensfreudig is the closest thing the German has to joie de vivre. I took a cab to the airport and sat in the cafe with a pot of mate in a copper vessel and wondered, maybe the story I was looking for all these years was not really there. I lost my sense of smell. My father, Wilhelm Edward Kantorowicz, spoke of his wartime experiences 3 times in his life. The last time was when we were hauling grass clippings out of the garden. I stopped to sniff a lemon tree that had burst into bloom. "Oh, Dad, get a load of this." And I remembered. But he explained again anyway. At that time I realized that my father had a silent disability, but maybe it was just only his inability to smell. It's a miracle my Oma got on the Trans-Siberian Railway across Russia, from Vladivostok to Osaka and Osaka to Los Angeles. It's a miracle, given what happened to my father, that I was even born. But then it's a miracle that any of us were born. It finally came to me in the search to heal my psychological and spiritual disconnect that I had forgotten the G word. That guy. But, it's still hard to imagine that Old Testament guy with whom we've got to have a special relationship, pulling all the shots. I prefer what the poet Rumi calls him, the friend. That's the kind of relationship I want. Look, here's what I've understood. There's coming into the now, feeling your butt on the chair, feeling your feet on the ground, noticing the light that's coming through the skylight, being present. But then there is also this greater now. This greater now that includes the past, the future, and all the causality that gets stuck into the present. Do miracles happen to some people and not to others? That's the kind of greater now that I want to be present to. How do you be present to that light? What did we do in the wars, Daddy? We didn't do anything. Events just happened. We did the best we could in the greater now. Bill Kent left Wilhelm Edward Kantorowicz in the old country. It's time for me to leave him there too.
I heard my father, Roger Thomas Kent, speak of his 1960s experiences many times with the same words. Hell no, we won't go. He didn't go, and I'm very glad. I love you, Dad.
Thank you for coming. I tell you to stay for the next shows, but the festival is almost over. I have a wonderful postlude, but I don't have time because the next show is going to come in, right? Oh, I do? I've got 10 minutes? See, I put a paper over the clock because I can't stand being tired.
It's 2.
What time is it?
It's 2 o'clock.
It's 2 o'clock. Well, if I may indulge you, Elizabeth, my wife, and I went to Germany in 1986. She was trying to audition for the German opera companies. And we ended up working for the U.S. military. I call it burning off my 60s karma. It took 7 years. You can't imagine what it's like pulling up to an army base outside Stuttgart in an old Mercedes-Benz that's belching fumes. And there is a 5'2" African-American woman in fatigues and big jackboots holding an M16, asking to see your passport. Well, I ended up helping Army people learn those things called computers, MS-DOS, and Word Perfect. One day, they'd asked me to teach Textverarbeitung, word processing in German, to German employees of the U.S. military. It was a U.S. holiday, and Germans had to come into work. Well, someone brought another transistor radio, and at 10 o'clock they were listening to the news. I thought nothing of it. At 12 o'clock, we were all gathered around it. It was the day the wall went down. We couldn't finish the class. Everybody was stunned. I remember driving home on a road that was a detour and watching the faces of everybody as aghast as they couldn't believe it. I was so crazy, I wanted to call my aunt, the only one still alive, and say, "We can go back to Berlin now!" In Stuttgart, we had dinner with some friends, and then we went out and saw Batman. A couple of years later, I was working at the headquarters of the United States military in Europe when we heard this news story about this place called Kuwait. The next day, that place turned into a triple defended armed camp, more than it ever was before. The helicopters came down on the football field in the center of the base, and you could tell that big shots were there because they had these personal security guards, and the personal security guards in the army don't dress in uniform, they dress in poorly fitting polyester suits because their muscles are bulging out. So I heard this poor soldier talking to another, and he said, "It looks like there's going to be a war. I didn't sign up for this." Well, since I was an adjunct lecturer, all of my students went away to the Gulf, and I didn't have any income. And I had a daughter who was 6 months old. Well, I tried to work in Germany, but I couldn't get a work permit. You see, my lawyer that I went to said that my father had denied his German citizenship. Yeah, good idea that he did. So I went off to Switzerland one day and sat in a post office with large phone books trying to cold call to see if anyone needed a computer trainer. And after 2 days, I got a hit. So the next day, I drove down to Basel, Switzerland, on the Rhine, right on the border, and I'm pulling into the border station, and I realize I don't have my passport. So I pull over and I ask the Swiss guys, "Look, I've got this U.S. identity card, and it says that I have the rank of a major on it. Can I go through?" "Oh, yeah, no problem." The Swiss, you know. "But you better talk to the German guy." So I went over to the German side, and they said, 35 marks a day pass." "Okay, I'll take it." Well, I ended up working in Basel, both part-time and eventually full-time on a number of projects so that we could have enough money to get back to the U.S. But since I had to register at these hotels every day, there wasn't Airbnb, I was concerned that the police, who picked up the registration cards every day, would kind of notice a pattern. So I slunk around just like one of those refugees, a digital wetback. Fortunately, I found a little apartment eventually and hid out for the rest of the winter. But in my last days, I went back there and had a hotel right on the Rhine. It was late spring. The Rhine is very wide in that area, and boats still navigate it from the ocean. And I watched, way upriver, these 3 guys tear off their clothes and jump into the river. And they were having a great time floating down past one bridge, past another bridge, right past my hotel room, and on till I lost them from view. And I thought, yeah, that's turning off your mind, relaxing, and floating downstream. And that maybe God is just that guy at the way downstream who's got a towel and dry clothes and is willing to take you in. Thank you.